I was halfway through folding my laundry when I noticed the lights flicker. Not a normal flicker, like the ones you ignore in old apartments, but a tiny stutter, like the building itself had hiccuped. I paused, socks in hand, ears straining for the telltale buzz. A voice followed a moment later. "Careful, I might shock the place again, accidentally." I turned toward the hallway. She was standing there, mid-40s, sleeves rolled up, a smudge of something grease on her wrist. The apartment smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and coffee. She grinned, but it wasn't the kind that asks for a response. It was more like she knew the world was messy, and she didn't mind. I managed a weak laugh. "I'll keep my distance." She tilted her head, watching me, and for a moment I felt like I'd been caught folding a napkin in a way that made no sense at all. Then she moved on, tools clinking in her bag, and the lights steadied. It wasn't my first time noticing her. Landlady, yes, but more than that, someone who showed up in the quiet corners of my life. She remembered my order from the coffee shop downstairs. Black, 2 sugars, no fuss. And sometimes, if she caught me staring at my phone too long, she'd ask, "Waiting for someone, or just the world to notice you?" I always smiled and said nothing. I left my laundry basket by the machines, hands tucked in pockets, watching her kneel to check the fuse box. Her fingers moved with a kind of precision that made me realize I hadn't looked closely at anyone's hands in months. The way she worked, the subtle crease at her brow when she concentrated, it was ordinary, but I wanted to memorize it anyway. The apartment hummed in the background, quiet except for the occasional drip from the faucet. I noticed I hadn't texted anyone that morning. Not that anyone would mind, but the thought lingered. My phone buzzed once with an unsent message from last night, the cursor blinking like it was waiting for courage I didn't have. "You okay there?" she asked. I jumped slightly, glanced up, and nodded. "Yeah, just thinking." She didn't press. She never did. She leaned back, letting her eyes scan the ceiling for a moment before flicking toward mine. The faintest quirk of a smile. A shared understanding, though neither of us said what it was. I wondered if she could tell that I spent too much time noticing small things. How her shoulders sloped when she laughed. The way she tucked a stray hair behind her ear while pretending she didn't care. I wondered if she could guess that loneliness isn't loud. It's in unsent texts, in pausing mid-thought to remember what it felt like to be noticed. "Almost done here," she said, standing. The bag of tools swung gently in her hand. She hesitated at the doorway, like she wanted to say something, then didn't. I wanted to ask her to stay. I wanted to say something that made sense, that would close the gap between ordinary and whatever this was. But I only managed, "Thanks. For everything." Her smile softened, and for a second, the hallway felt warmer than it had in months. Then she turned, and I caught the glint of a phone on the counter. My name flashed across the screen, unknown number. A message that said, "Be careful with the wires." Or not. Your choice. I blinked, heart a little faster, fingers hovering over the phone. And for the first time in weeks, I thought maybe this ordinary day wasn't going to be so ordinary after all. The next afternoon, she knocked on my door again. This time, it wasn't about flickering lights or fuses. She held a small tray with 2 steaming mugs, one clumsily wrapped in a napkin. "Tea?" she asked, tilting her head like it was a casual offer, but I caught the pause in her eyes, like she was testing if I'd accept. I gestured toward the couch, and we sat across from each other, knees tucked in, a little too aware of the space between us. The room smelled faintly of the lemon cleaner and faintly of her perfume, something warm, not overpowering. I stirred my tea, watching her hands curl around her mug, thumbs brushing the rim. "I used to make this for my dad," she said after a while, her voice soft, almost hesitant. "He liked it too strong. Thought it would keep him awake. Didn't matter much. He'd fall asleep halfway through anyway." I nodded, because that made sense. Because sometimes people lingered in your memory in ways you didn't plan. "I get that," I said, though I wasn't sure what I meant. Mostly, I just wanted to keep listening. There was a pause. A quiet that wasn't empty. It had weight. I noticed her gaze drift to the window. I wasn't married for long. Too many expectations, she murmured, and the words weren't a complaint, just a fact. I felt the weight of it settling in my chest, but it wasn't suffocating, just real. I imagined the reasons she stayed cautious. Her life had boundaries, routines, and here I was, half her age, intrusive in a polite way, leaning too close to her quiet edges. And yet, there was something tender in the way we sat, neither rushing, neither forcing the air to shift. I wanted to reach for her hand, to anchor this moment before it dissolved into the ordinary. Instead, I found myself asking, "Do you ever regret anything?" She tilted her head, a small smile tugging at one corner. "Every day," she said lightly, "but mostly the things I didn't do." Her eyes flicked to mine, a soft challenge, or maybe it was a question. I swallowed, noticing how my hands curled around the cup, knuckles white, like I was holding more than just tea. We sat in silence after that. No one spoke. I traced the rim of my mug with my thumb, watching the sunlight dust her hair gold in the quiet way only mid-afternoon light can. Each small detail, the flick of her wrist, the way she let her shoulders slump, felt like a private signal. A quiet acknowledgement that we existed in this shared space, even for a little while. Finally, she reached over to adjust the blanket I'd draped awkwardly across the couch. Our fingers brushed, so brief, so casual, but it lingered longer than the touch should have. Her gaze met mine, steady, with the faintest glimmer of a smile. I didn't say anything. I just let it happen, letting the brush of skin, the weight of her eyes, speak for everything words could not. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. It started with a clatter in the hallway. I had just finished fixing the light in my own apartment when the small box I'd set down toppled over, spilling screws across the floor. She appeared instantly, crouching beside me, her hands brushing against mine as we both reached for the same tiny bolt. "Sorry," I muttered, pulling back, but she stayed close, almost deliberately. "It's fine," she said, but the way her eyes held mine made my chest tighten. Not loud, not dramatic, just an awareness that we were too near, too aware. I wanted to ask her to stay. I wanted to ask her to stop, too. We straightened up, standing shoulder to shoulder, neither speaking. The screws rattled in the box, tiny percussion keeping time with my heartbeat. I noticed the faint crease near her eye when she smiled, small, intimate, but enough to pull me toward her. I started, then stopped. The words dissolved. Nothing fit the moment. I wanted to say something honest and safe, but my voice betrayed me, trailing off into silence. She glanced at the door, then back at me. "Your neighbor mentioned you've been fixing things a lot lately." Her tone was casual, almost teasing, but I caught the hint of observation in her voice. That little intrusion felt like a tether, reminding me that this closeness wasn't invisible. I nodded, trying not to lean in, trying not to notice how close she smelled. Lemon, coffee, and something softer I couldn't name. I kept my hands fidgeting with a screwdriver, eyes darting to the floor, pretending I wasn't aware of the heat in her gaze. "I guess accidents happen," she said, her fingers brushing mine again as she handed me a screw. A pause. Our fingers lingered. A friend of mine from downstairs popped her head into the hallway, holding a bag of groceries. "Hey, sorry to bother." She froze, and I froze. A small cough. An awkward shift. She realized the tension instantly, offering nothing but a quick, uncomfortable smile before retreating. The moment snapped, leaving us standing too close, too aware, both pretending to adjust something meaningless, my sleeve, the box of screws, but the air still crackled. I wanted to say something, anything, but all I could do was meet her eyes, short and deliberate. A question unspoken. "What now?" She stepped a fraction closer, brushing her fingers over mine one last time, a gesture almost too intimate to be casual. My breath caught. I imagined leaning in, letting the world shrink until it was just her and me in this ordinary hallway. Her gaze dropped briefly, then lifted, steady and faintly amused. I thought I saw the hint of a smile, teasing me, or maybe teasing herself. I stepped back before I crossed the line. She stepped back too, and the distance felt suddenly vast. But the memory of the nearly touch, the almost words, lingered like a spark I couldn't quite shake. I didn't know what I wanted exactly, and I wasn't sure she did either. But that short, silent beat, where everything hung between us, was enough. Enough to make ordinary screws and spilled boxes feel charged. Enough to make me notice every small detail about her, all over again. And maybe, I thought as I watched her straighten her sleeves, I'd notice it forever. We were sitting on the bench outside the building, the late afternoon sun slanting across the pavement in thin gold lines. I had my hands wrapped around my coffee cup, staring at the steam rising, pretending I wasn't watching her. She hadn't said much since we stepped outside. Just a quiet shuffle of feet, a hum of the city around us, and the occasional flick of her gaze toward the parked cars. I felt something tighten in my chest, a little pang of jealousy I couldn't quite name. Not of anyone specific, just the thought of losing this fragile closeness. "You're quiet," I said finally, my voice lower than I intended. She smiled faintly, shrugging. "I like quiet." I laughed softly, but it came out brittle. "Me too. Usually." There was a pause. I noticed the way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, her fingers lingering for a second too long on the rim of the coffee cup. I wanted to reach out, touch her hand, just to prove she was real, to prove I was real. "I sometimes think about what it would have been like if I'd done things differently," she said, almost in passing. Her voice was calm, but I caught the tremor beneath it. Small choices, things that didn't seem like much. And I wonder. I turned toward her, feeling the words tremble on my lips. Wonder what? Her eyes met mine for a heartbeat, steady and raw, before looking away. If I'd taken more risks, lived more for myself, maybe met someone who... She trailed off, a sigh escaping. The bench creaked as she shifted, closer by mere inches, but enough. I didn't answer immediately. I didn't need to. The tension in the air said more than any words could. I traced the edge of my cup with a thumb, pretending I wasn't imagining her leaning just a little toward me, imagining the brush of her hand. "You make it sound like maybe it could have been different," I said carefully, voice almost inaudible. She glanced at me then, eyes soft but sharp, and I felt it. Something unspoken, something fragile dangling in the space between us. A quiet admission of longing that neither of us had the courage to name fully. I wanted to speak, to fill the pause with truth, but all that came out was a fragment. And then nothing. She laughed softly, not humorless, but almost a sigh. "You're thinking too much." I did. About every fleeting touch, every glance, every almost confession we'd exchanged. About the risk. About how wrong, or right, it might feel. The wind shifted, stirring the loose leaves at our feet. Her gaze fell on mine again. The silence stretched, and I realized I was holding my breath, waiting for something irreversible. Something I both feared and wanted more than I could admit. I wanted to ask her to stay. I wanted to ask her to lean in. I wanted to ask 1,000 things and none of them at all. Instead, I just watched her, words failing, heart beating too fast. And she asked, quietly, almost to herself, "Do you ever wonder what we might regret?" The next week, she stopped dropping by unexpectedly. The bench outside, once a small sanctuary, sat empty. I caught myself pausing mid-step in the hallway, expecting her tools, her coffee, her presence, and then remembering she wasn't there. When I called, she didn't pick up. When I texted, the little bubble never turned blue. I tried to tell myself it was normal. She had work, responsibilities, life, but the apartment felt too quiet, as if someone had taken the hum away. Then came the note. A sticky pad tucked under my door, handwriting small and precise. "I have complications. Things you don't know. I need to sort them. Don't wait. Complications." The word pressed against my chest. I knew it could mean anything. An ex, a child, a problem at work, some unseen boundary. My mind spun through every possibility, each one sharper than the last. I found myself replaying her smile, the brush of her fingers on my hand, the way her eyes lingered. Had I misread it all? Or was she protecting me? Or herself? I couldn't tell. Days passed. I stopped checking the coffee shop downstairs, stopped waiting by the mailbox. I walked past the bench without thinking, yet my body remembered anyway. The curve of the seat, the way the sunlight caught her hair. And then, a random sound, a knock, faint, hesitant. I ran to the door, only to find a delivery note slipped under the frame. A package for her, addressed elsewhere. I held it, thumb brushing the paper, imagining her hands on it, her laugh at the inconvenience. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. I caught myself drafting messages I didn't send. Are you okay? Do you need help? Can I? And then I deleted them, fingers hovering over the keyboard, unable to risk too much. At night, I'd replay our moments like scenes in a film I couldn't pause. The spilled screws, the almost touch on the bench, her words trailing off like soft confessions, the silent questions that neither of us had the courage to finish. I imagined her walking through a doorway somewhere else, maybe talking to someone I couldn't see, her laugh a little brighter, a little different. My stomach tightened. Not jealousy exactly, just the ache of absence. One evening, I found her thermos by the laundry room sink, forgotten. My fingers brushed it, and for a second, I could almost hear her voice. Careful, I might shock the place again, accidentally. The memory hit me like a small jolt, enough to remind me that everything had been real, and yet, now paused. I left the thermos where it was, untouched, and I walked away from the laundry machines, from the apartment, from the pause, carrying the quiet weight of unanswered questions. Life had pressed pause, and neither of us had pressed play. I found her in the kitchen that evening, leaning against the counter as if the weight of the day had settled there already. Steam rose from a mug she hadn't stirred, curling into the soft lamplight. I froze at the doorway for a second, unsure whether to step in or turn around. Hey, she said, voice low, casual, but not quite casual. Her eyes flicked to mine, then back to the mug. Hey, I replied, moving closer, hands shoved in pockets. Every step felt heavy, like I was walking through invisible water. We didn't sit, didn't move, just existed in the same space, breathing around each other, counting seconds. The silence was tight, but not uncomfortable. Charged, yes, but not frantic. I got your note, I said finally, voice trailing off. Her gaze lifted, steady, acknowledging it without flinching. Yeah, she said softly. Complications. I swallowed. The words still pressed against me. Can I mean, I stopped. The words seemed too fragile, too risky, too permanent. She studied me for a long moment. Then, without looking away from the counter, she said, You don't have to say anything. You can leave. The weight of that permission, or warning, made my chest ache. I wanted to retreat. I wanted to stay. I wanted to freeze, then move forward all at once. I don't want to leave, I said finally, quiet, careful. It was the first honest thing I'd said all week. I don't know what I'm allowed to want. She turned slightly, the faintest exhale escaping her lips. I don't know either, she admitted, and the words were raw, stripped of pretense. We stood there, the kitchen light painting long shadows, every small movement amplified. A flick of her wrist, the tilt of her head, the way she traced the rim of her mug absent-mindedly. I felt my heart thudding in rhythm with hers, though neither of us spoke. I reached out, just a little, brushing her hand as I took my mug. The touch was deliberate, tentative, human. Not a declaration, not a demand. Just acknowledgement. Her fingers lingered on mine for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. A silent answer. Okay, she whispered finally, and it wasn't a promise. It wasn't a surrender. It wasn't even perfect, but it was enough. I nodded. Okay. I echoed, letting the word rest between us. And for a few seconds, longer than it should have been. The kitchen existed only for us. The hum of the fridge, the faint hiss from the kettle, the soft, ordinary warmth of two people daring to stay in the same space. We didn't cross any lines, didn't create new ones, didn't fix everything. But in that quiet acknowledgement, I realized something had shifted. Not everything, not completely, but enough to carry us forward. Just enough that it was 8:47 a.m. when I noticed her shoes at the doorstep, lined up neatly against the worn rug. A small ritual we had fallen into. She arrived early, I brewed black coffee, and for a few minutes, the apartment existed in soft routine, quiet but shared. She leaned against the counter, hands wrapped around her mug, the faint steam curling around her fingers. I traced the chipped edge of the counter with my thumb, remembering the first day I'd seen her here, fixing the lights, grinning like mischief was a habit. Time had stretched and compressed in all the spaces between, but somehow we'd arrived here, in ordinary comfort. We didn't speak much, not because we didn't have words, but because words would have been redundant. A glance, a shift of shoulders, the soft clink of spoons against mugs. These were our conversations. Later, we walked to the bench outside, the one I had imagined empty for weeks. She sat first, settling into the familiar curve, and I joined her, coffee in hand. Sunlight warmed the edges of the bench and her hair, dusted in that soft golden glow I had memorized long ago. "Remember the screws?" I asked quietly. She chuckled, a sound low and private, as if sharing a memory meant we were the only witnesses. How could I forget? I sipped my coffee, watching her fingers trace the grain of the wood. We didn't rush, didn't linger on the nearly touch, the unsent texts, or the week-long pause that had felt like a lifetime. Those things existed. They shaped the rhythm of our steps, but they no longer carried weight. Our routine had settled into something neither perfect nor planned. She brewed tea. I made the coffee. We traded quiet remarks about weather or neighbors. Sometimes we just sat, shoulder to shoulder, letting the silence fill the spaces neither of us wanted to name. A letter arrived for her one morning, months late, and we opened it together. Nothing urgent, nothing dramatic, just words folded with care. We read them aloud, pausing at commas, laughing softly at lines that echoed old habits. Even the ordinary things, furniture that needed adjusting, a kettle that hissed too loud, felt like markers of a life being quietly, carefully shared. As we walked home from the park that evening, her hand brushed mine briefly, deliberately, a tiny anchor against the ordinary world. I didn't squeeze, didn't speak, just let it linger, enough to say everything without saying a word. Back at the apartment, she poured the last of the tea into our mugs. I watched her, a quiet thought tracing the edges of my mind. The city moved around us, impatient, busy, loud. But here, with her, time bent. I didn't feel the need to define it. Love didn't need a grand declaration. It was in the small gestures, the shared benches, the unremarkable hours we spent noticing each other. And when I caught her eyes one last time that evening, a soft, knowing smile passing between us, I thought, this is enough. Not perfect, not dramatic, just enough. She turned toward the counter, and I traced her shoulder with my gaze. The steam from the mugs rose in lazy spirals. We were here, together, finally, quietly. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next? Moments that linger in everyday life, rather than fireworks.